Kunite alawa. Kunite. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey Guys podcast. This week, in honor of Star Wars Day and its return to cinema screens for its 40th anniversary, we look back at Return of the Jedi, what for the longest time was considered the de facto third best movie in the Star Wars saga. A New Hope and Jaws might have ushered in the rise of the summer blockbuster, but make no mistake, Return of the Jedi established a template for how tentpole movies would be structured for the next 4 decades. A flawed spectacle of the highest order, does it still hold up 40 years after its original release? And perhaps more importantly, how does a non-Star Wars fan make of it? Or sorry, should say, what does a non-Star Wars fan make of it in 2023? And that's you, Rob, of course.
That's my intro, is it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I like Star Wars. You're the one who doesn't like Star Wars.
First of all, I could have sworn you were saying Kumite. I was like, this isn't the Bloodsport podcast.
It does sound a little bit like Kumite. I don't know why. Like, I know a lot of people hate the special editions and the additions, and some of the special effects in that sequence in particular, with like the band that was added in, it's a bit egregious, especially the close-up of the mouth. But for some odd reason, that song is just stuck in my head in perpetuity. Like every so often, I'll just say "Kunite alawa kunite," and it's annoying for everyone involved. But it's just one of those songs that's stayed in my head for years, and it shouldn't be there. But
I want to mention a few things. I mean, mentioning the band first of all. Was that Alien from Men in Black? That singing alien. That was the same one that was in the Men in Black soundtrack, wasn't it?
Well, that's the thing. The alien's a weird one. And again, we should clear this up because Rob's going to ask a lot of odd questions to anyone who's a massive Star Wars fan, because you've seen this film once, yeah?
Yeah.
Before today, or before like the last couple of days.
So this is my second viewing.
Of Return of the Jedi.
And I will reiterate, be my last.
Oh, well, this is going to be an interesting conversation. But no, like the alien, for instance, the one with like the lips and everything, that character is in the original Return of the Jedi, but it's a puppet. But they've added the Kunite guy, and they've turned her into a CG character. So that's one of the more kind of egregious additions.
I actually looked at this. She is then in the Men in Black soundtrack, the song that Will Smith does, "We Are the Men in Black." And then that's
actually that character.
It looks like the same character who starts singing, doing the Men in Black song.
I mean, it might be. It could be. I have no idea. I'm not sure if you're telling me or asking me at this point. But of all the characters, because that's one thing about this film, it's got so many great characters. And like, are you really going to take that one and put into Men in Black? That'd be so upsetting. Yeah. But, I guess anyway, it makes sense if you're doing a music video. You can't have a rancor in a music video. So, yeah, to get back to the initial point.
Hang on. What's a rancor?
You know what a rancor is. Don't fuck with me.
No.
Surely, you're a big fan of popular culture. Surely these things bleed over. It's the big monster that Luke fights in the rancor pit, I guess you call it.
At the bottom. Where the dude from Conan cries his eyes out because it's...
Yeah, he's an oddly memorable character. I don't know why everybody remembers the guy who gets really upset about the Rancor. But anyway.
Right.
So I assume then, based on what you're saying, that you're not a fan of Return of the Jedi.
No, I wasn't. And my annoyance started right at the beginning with the overused scroll.
That's a weird criticism to make. I mean, we're talking Star Wars here.
The scroll is pointless. It doesn't need to be there just because you're just explaining what you're going to explain again in the first 30 seconds of the film. But in the middle of it, right, it's a 3-paragraph scroll. And in the middle of it, it's little does Luke know that the Galactic Empire has secretly begun construction on a new armored space station, even more powerful than the first dreaded Death Star. And then through the film, they say, well, it's the Death Star again. It's like fucking Ridley Scott. I'm getting his name right this week. It's like Ridley Scott saying, "Ooh, I've made a better Blade Runner." It's just Blade Runner.
But Star Wars always does this in terms of just more, in terms of Death Stars. I mean, it was they just about get away with it in this film.
He's begun construction on a new armored space station, even more powerful than the first dreaded Death Star. But they've just called it, and it's not even more powerful because the first. I do remember this. The first Death Star, the only way you could take it out, I remember this from Rogue One, is by shooting a laser through the little Death Star butthole.
Yeah, but you got to remember, that one was complete. That was the difference. Like, that was a completed Death Star. This one is still under construction. Yeah. So the idea is that once it's complete, it'll be a more powerful Death Star.
No, it's pointless.
I mean, you're kind of... picking up like one of the strengths and subsequent weaknesses of this film is its simplification of everything. Like this film is, I would suggest, earnest to a fault. When I go back and rewatch it, some of the dialogue is so ridiculous on the nose. It never, like, any of the kind of nuance and layers that were established so successfully in Empire Strikes Back are ostensibly abandoned in this film for a really simplistic, really straightforward story of good versus evil. It's much more kid-friendly after the much darker Empire Strikes Back as well. And that does lead to problems with this film, as I said, especially for someone like you who's not a fan of the films. And, just to be clear with this podcast, we've done episode 1, episode 3, and now episode 6. So he's all over the place.
So I will say, though, of the 3 you've made me watch, this is the better one. But that's not saying anything.
Yeah,
when this is like annoying characters like C-3PO. And there's a question, right? You made me watch 1 and 3. Anakin Skywalker made C-3PO. So why doesn't he remember any of the shit?
Don't worry about that nonsense. That's fine. You've got to remember, like, these films weren't made with... I don't know. It is strange that sometimes George Lucas has decided to ignore his own writing with the prequels. There's no two ways about it. Like, I'm sure when he was writing it, he wasn't thinking, oh, I'm definitely going to go back and make the prequels, although he called them 4, 5, and 6, so he must have had in the back of his mind. And he has abandoned that in places. But there's a ton of bizarre choices made in the prequels, which we won't go into right now.
You have all this build-up, right, about Boba Fett. Boba Fett's the badass. Boba Fett, like, his armor's amazing. He's such a great... That dude died like a bitch in a Benny Hill sketch.
He did, like,
that entire opening, which is meant to be a great opening, is... what was I? I think I got 52 minutes into the film and nothing happened.
I mean, that's just wrong. That's just ostensibly...
You had this stupid little opening that could have been 5 minutes and they drug it out. It was so annoying. Then they killed Boba Fett, who's meant to be the badass, in such a little bitch way. Then, and the actual laws of a lightsaber as well, right? Apparently, the lightsaber can't cut through anything until it needs to cut through something, and then it will.
Well, again, you've done a bit of a Liam there, where I'm like, that's a lot of questions in one, or a lot of statements. So I'm going to go back to the original. Like, a lot happens in this film. Like, the idea that you get 52 minutes into this film and nothing happens is bonkers. Like, the cold opening alone, like, you have 2 set pieces back to back. You have Jabba's palace and then Jabba's barge, which I would argue are both fantastic, but fair enough. However, I'm not going to argue against the Boba Fett thing. The Boba Fett thing, like, as somebody who'd been set up as such a badass, like, you think he was introduced in Empire Strikes Back, and obviously you just know him by, his reputation, I suppose. Like, oh, he's supposed to be this ultimate bounty hunter badass. And then he shows up in this film, and you're like, oh, well, this is going to be the one. This is where Boba Fett really gets to shine. And you are completely right. He goes out like a complete bitch. And I'm not sure if such a fundamentally cool character has ever been done as dirty as Boba Fett, because he comes in, everyone loves him. He's this totally cool guy. He's kind of like the Judge Dredd of the Star Wars movie. You don't see his face. He just does cool stuff. No emotions, no history or anything. And then all of a sudden, he dies like a bitch. Then, of course, they go back. They make him a whiny little kid in episode 2, which we will get round to eventually. Then, of course, they take it into the future and say, oh, he actually survived. And they make him the worst character in... I'm not sure. I assume you haven't seen the TV series. Boba Fett.
I actually have, because I watched The Mandalorian, and I know then Boba Fett became the Mandalorian show halfway through.
Oh, yeah.
I watched Boba Fett too.
Well, so the reason that then subsequently the Boba Fett show became the Mandalorian show again is because the Boba Fett show is terrible. And the way the character's represented. And you would think, I mean, I know you love the actor who plays Boba Fett modern day. Is it
Tamar Morrison?
Yeah.
I think he's great.
Yeah, I think he's great. He's not great in this, but again, I think a lot of it is how he's, how the character's being dealt with. They really turned it into something of, it feels like the CW of Star Wars show. It's just an unpleasant show, and I just can't think of another character who was, on such a kind of, everybody thought was like this really cool character, this great, creation, and then they've just kind of ground him down into, like, I think he was supposed to be in the later series of The Mandalorian. They've just basically abandoned it now because they fucked up Boba Fett. So can't argue with that one. But to say nothing happens in the first 52 minutes, Jesus Christ, dude.
It's not, is it? You had what you called the opening 2 sets, then Luke, and we'll get to all this because there's something I want to mention at the beginning, but and then Luke travels to Yoda, and then Yoda goes, okay, I'm dead, fine, all right, move on. And then Alec Guinness comes back and says, oh, yeah, by the way, he's your brother and he's your sister. Oh, gosh, she's your sister. Fine. And then they go to the space station then where everyone's going, oh yeah, okay, we're gonna, and oh my god, if they say Forest Moon of Endor one more fucking time, I will slit my wrists.
I don't think you're having any respect for the many Bothans who died, Rob. The many Bothans died. I know, I don't think you're appreciating that this is the third part of the most popular film, certainly at the time.
Because you made me watch this as the first viewing.
No, I know, but I'm just like, you're saying about like nothing happened. I think any other series where this is the closing, what would have been, at least at the time, the closing chapter, the most popular film, series of all time, you would end up with tons of dialogue. You'd have flashbacks for the Emperor. You'd have all this stuff. This film just doesn't stop at anything. And I am genuinely amazed that you don't think much happens. Like, to come straight in with a cold open, loosely linked to what happened at the end of Empire Strikes Back, i.e., it's a rescue mission for Han Solo. It's like set piece. All right, Yoda's dead. And they couldn't wait to kill off Yoda. They're like, yeah, Yoda, just die super quick, yeah? Yoda's dead in fucking no time. Yeah. There's no explanation of how long Luke has been training. There's no real explanation about basically, they just have a guy come in. They establish the Emperor is a badass by making him more scared of the Emperor than he is of Darth Vader. Just keep going. And then next thing you know, it's just set piece. Bothans are dead. And then 3 set pieces at once. And it closes. Like, the economy... And again, it's a criticism as much as it is a celebration of the movie. The economy of storytelling in this film, going back and rewatching it, I was like, I can't believe they managed to do this. Like, there is so little storytelling in what is the third part of a trilogy of movies where they're just like, listen, we want to get to the ending as quickly as possible. We just want to get to explosions. And that's why I mentioned it in the introduction, is I'm not sure if there was another film. I can't think of another film like this before 1983. Like, beyond the fact that it looks phenomenal, this really did create the modern template of so many things, like the 3-pronged finale and all that. Like, that just didn't exist in 1983.
No, I'll give you that, right? It looked great, and I'll give you that, the storytelling, and you move into just basically, as you said, it's set piece, and it's closing down the story from the other 2 films. I totally agree with all of that. But from my point of view, a guy who's watched this once before, didn't really remember much about it, has watched it again. It then becomes more of, oh my God, this is boring. And you start questioning a lot of things within it. Like, you had right at the beginning, right? You had that guy come up, Jabba the Hutt's second in command. The dude that has his headpiece wrap around his neck.
They're like head tentacles, He's an alien,
Yeah, well, obviously.
you know what I mean? No, like, he's not wearing a hat, so that's part of his head.
Yeah. So you see him. Well, I didn't mean headpieces in hat. It's just from. All
right, fair enough. Sorry.
You see him, and you get that weird villain intro that you used to get, where the light would just shine on his eyes and everything. And then the best they could give him to come up with was Wonga Wonga. Like, fucking seriously, Wonga Wonga.
It's still Wonga Wonga, I suppose. But yeah, I see your point.
And the other thing that really, I've already said it, right? Just call it fucking Endor. How many more times have they got to call it the Forest Moon of Endor? Okay, we get it. It's a fucking forest. It's a moon, and it's called Endor. Stop saying all of it.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's not called Endor. It's the Forest Moon. Is it? See, now I'm confused myself. Is Endor the planet, and it's a forest moon that revolves,
they just call it the Forest Moon Endor?
Forest Moon? No, they call it the Forest Moon of Endor.
No, Forest Moon Endor. I checked this.
I thought they called it the Forest Moon of Endor. Oh, see, I should be checking this. Jesus Christ.
But you're on there, right? They jump onto these speed bikes, ridiculously fast for a forest. Like, absolutely. And Luke's on the back of Leia.
It's such a cool set piece, dude. Even to this day, it's such an awesome set piece.
Okay. Luke's on the back of it and says to Leia, jam their comms, it's the middle button. So you're telling me each one of these speed bikes has this magic button that can jam everybody's comms? Or did they just have the magic bike that has the comm jamming button?
Yeah, but that speaks to, again, the whole Star Wars and specifically the Return of the Jedi thing. It's like, just don't ask any questions. Like, that's the point. It's the complete opposite. Well, no, you know what I mean? Like, of all the things to pick out, I think he says, jam their comms, outer switch or middle switch, whatever it is. It's like, they're telling you this is what this does. Don't worry about it.
But why
it's the complete opposite of Star Trek.
Why did they make these bikes and go, do you know what these ridiculously fast bikes in a forest need? A jamming switch for everybody.
Well, I guess it works narratively, I suppose. That's basic. That is the answer to most of the things. They're just like keep the narrative moving. Like I said, I just think any other film you end up with flashbacks. You have over explanations. Here, it is just about propulsion. I don't. I guess in that sequence, it is literally and figuratively. It just does not want to stop for anything it doesn't have to. It's just don't like if you don't have to explain it, don't explain it. Keep going. Which I know what you mean from a technical standpoint. In that sequence, it can be quite annoying. But the other side of it is that, and something that was lost with the prequels, and certainly lost with the more recent sequels, where they over-explain everything. Like here, it just leaves open certain elements to your imagination. It's like, well, what happened to Luke? Why is Luke such a badass all of a sudden? It's like they don't. Do you know how they explain it? Instead of having a flashback, instead of having storytelling beats, they just dress him in black. They're like, dude, listen, he's going to be in black. He's going to look like a badass. That's enough. Like that is literally enough. I reckon that's the reason they dress him in black. Because like, listen, if he's dressed in black, he looks like he's a badass. And that's it. We're not going to go back. We're not going to over-explain it.
Yeah,
it's like the Emperor, he walks out with a walking stick. Why should we think this wrinkly old bastard with a walking stick is so badass? It's just because it's quietly established without you really kind of realizing it.
I thought the dress in black thing was hinting towards him going towards the dark side. That's the way.
There was that as well. That was to suggest there was like some elements of conflict. But I also think, like I said, but obviously I was born the year before this was released. It was in 1983, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was born when this was released, yeah.
Yeah. So I came to it later, but this film was, when I was really young, this was my favorite Star Wars film. And it wasn't necessarily because of the Ewoks and stuff like that. It was because I loved the look of Luke.
I'm glad it wasn't because of the Ewoks.
Yeah, we'll get to the Ewoks in a minute. But you got when I was a kid, visually, this film was the most badass. And a big part of that, and the reason I think I always preferred Luke to Han, was because of his role in this film. Up until this movie, he's a bit of a whiny so-and-so, Luke Skywalker. In this, suddenly he does feel like a badass kind of, Jedi. He is a lot cooler. He's not moaning. But like I said, so much of, when I think back to this film, I can't disassociate it from the toys that I had as a kid. And all of them were secondhand because we got them in 1986, 1987. Yeah. And I had 3 different versions of Luke in black. And I think maybe just because they were the more recent toys, that nearly, I would say 80% of the Star Wars toys I had were Return of the Jedi toys. Yeah. So I think that's maybe why I had a stronger connection to this film, and specifically to Luke Skywalker, just because I thought the action figure was cool. Just Luke in, why would I want Luke in his weird white drape, in his weird white coat? I want him in the black suit, looking like a badass, and specifically with his totally awesome green lightsaber, which I know you also have a problem with, of course.
Speaking of Han, I haven't got a problem. I haven't got a problem with lightsabers. I think lightsabers are cool. I've got a problem.
Inconsistent lightsabers.
The inconsistency.
You are, in fairness, you are playing Jedi Fallen Order at the moment. That has very inconsistent,
absolutely.
It's not just this. They're just inconsistent across the board, aren't they?
So you mentioned Han, right? And I mean, he's frozen in that metal stuff. Why did he have to do his comfy?
In carbonite, for God's sake, dude. I'm not going to try and get too nerdy, but how do you not know it's carbonite? You must, you are covered. I look behind you, you are covered in geekery. Yeah. And I'm just there's so much bleed over. Star Wars is such an important part of popular culture. How the fuck do you not know it's carbonite? I just feel like anyone, I could just walk out to anyone. It's what was Han stuck in Empire Strikes Back? They're carbonite? Yeah. Have you seen the film? No, it doesn't matter. Right, it feels like you're fucking with me on purpose. That's why.
He's frozen in carbonite. Why did he have to do his cum face when they freeze him? Right, when they zoomed in on his face, that dude looked like he was enjoying being frozen in it.
It is again the first time I've ever heard Han having a cum face, because again I come back to the toys and I'm I had the Han and carbonite. I always thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and it's you're trying to ruin it for me, saying that Han's got cum face. I'm I don't want to hear that, dude. Jesus Christ.
To ruin it. These are my observations. Jabba the Hutt is laughing when Leia frees Han because he knew all along that was Leia, right?
Yeah.
So he knew.
I have issues with that sequence. Yeah,
he knew all along that was Leia. But nobody could tell that was Billy D. Williams in the worst fucking helmet in the world. And this is a bloody space opera of stupid helmet. The guys in the control room at the beginning are all wearing black bedpans on their heads, but nobody could tell that was Billy D. Williams.
Yeah, that was a bit of a strange one because you've got to think Jabba the Hutt. He's been after Han Solo for a number of years. He's got to be aware of Lando Calrissian. Like he just has to be. And I'm not gonna lie, this was the first time. Like again, you're watching it in a different way. You're watching it for a podcast. You're watching it with a slightly more critical eye. I can't get away from my nostalgia. It's almost, especially with this film, it's almost impossible.
You never. But that's. I mean, we've always said nostalgia does rule.
Oh yeah, it does. But there are elements like you said where you maybe you weren't looking at it before. But one of the first things when I was rewatching this film, I was like, oh come on, like that's the best outfit you could do. Like, how can you not tell that's Lando Calrissian? He doesn't need to pull down the mask. You're just like, oh well, that's Lando Calrissian for sure. But then my other big issue with that sequence was that obviously Leia is like sneaking into that room to like release Han. And then all of a sudden they pull back a curtain, and not only have they been staying up all night, like, shh, quiet. She's definitely going to come out soon. All of a sudden people appear from the place is full, and I'm like, how did Leia not notice any of them? There were so many fucking people there, or aliens, whatever.
You had one of the aliens holding C-3PO's mouth. He's a droid. He doesn't have a mouth. He has a speaker. I'm pretty sure he could still turn around and go, oh, by the way, we're behind this fucking curtain.
Quiet now, C-3PO. It's a bit harsh. The stuff with C-3PO at the start of this film is great, though. I know you had an issue with the alien stuff. Him, like, knocking on the door, I love that whole, like, comedy sequence. I think that's some of the best comedy in the original trilogy. And I'm still a little amazed that you don't like anything about the whole Jabba's palace, Jabba's barge. Like, it's just the film just gets going straight away. And as much as, like, Jabba's palace is so much about the iconography at all. Like, the more you think about it, the more it actually falls to pieces. Like, Luke is, of course, he rolls in, he does his Jedi mind trick, he's wearing all black, he's talking shit, you think, oh, he's cool. And then he does fall down like a pit, like a bitch, pretty quick. Like, you're like, you didn't see the fucking hole in the floor thing coming? And then on top of that, when he's fighting a Rancor, you think, oh, maybe he used some Jedi stuff. He throws a stone. Like, that is what he does. Like, to kill the Rancor.
That's like, the thing from the Boba Fett TV show, that they have the baby and put that. So that's a Rancor.
Yes, in Boba Fett. Yeah, he rides at the end of Boba Fett, which is, again, also ridiculous. We don't want to talk about that shit. It's terrible. But again, in those sequences, I'm like, all right, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, it's not quite as cool as I remember. But visually, it's awesome. But the stuff on Jabba's barge is all great. I mean, part of it is being ruined by I'm not sure if I assume you haven't seen the Family Guy set. They did all the original
the Blue
Star Wars
Harvest
films.
And things.
Yeah. There's a bit where Luke Skywalker walks to the edge of the plank, I guess you'd call it, and he does a little nod, and the music kicks in. It's like boom, boom, and it keeps cutting to different faces. Family Guy do an amazing visual gag with that, where it just keeps cutting back and forth to all the characters, and it keeps going boom, and they keep doing like little nods, and then of course it cuts like Tom Selleck doing a nod and stuff like that. And now I can't watch that and take it seriously. It's ridiculous.
And that's what I wanted. When we were on about Billy D. Williams, how nobody knew that was Billy D. Williams. He's not even hiding his acknowledgement of the other characters. Like, he's walking in and he clearly just goes, "All right." We read
and it's such an unsubtle nod. It's like the deepest nod. Yeah. It's kind of like the nodding equivalent of like a Japanese bow. It's like he nods with his whole fucking head, his shoulders, the full works. Like, dude, do you want to get caught? What the fuck? But to get to my point, like, I know Boba Fett goes out like a bitch. Like, there's no two ways about it. But do you like the sequence on Jabba's barge? Like, it's quite old-fashioned, and I'm not quite sure where that rope comes from, that Luke and Leia swing over on.
They're able to swing on, yeah.
But, like, and another thing, I guess, is you wouldn't have known it as a kid, or certainly not in 1983 going to the cinema. That bit when Luke suddenly kind of, like, lights up his lightsaber, and it's green, and like they know in the moment that that's a cool moment. I guess that kind of gets lost nowadays because, of course, we all know he's got a green lightsaber. But when you see it, I'm like, I bet you that absolutely fucking slayed in the cinema back in 1983.
But what's the thing about it being a green lightsaber?
It was largely because of practical reasons. Simply put, he was going to have a blue lightsaber, but because of the sequence on Jabba's barge, what is in the background? Loads and loads of blue sky. And it just didn't pop at all. So they were just like, all right, we're going to make it a green one instead. And we're going to establish... There is actually a deleted scene in which Luke Skywalker is building his own lightsaber. Because that's what he's supposed to do as a Jedi.
Did they explain how he builds it? Because it was blue in the last one, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, the longer story, and a lot of this stuff has been established in the years since, but a Jedi has to find their own kyber crystal, which is required. This would have come up in obviously some of the TV shows recently, but they've got to get their own kyber crystal, and that establishes the color of the blade. But back then, it was supposed to be, listen, there's red ones for the bad guys and there's blue ones for the goodies. And Luke's was actually in some of the early promotional stuff of Return of the Jedi, Luke's lightsaber is still blue because it was supposed to be blue. But like I said, on a practical level, they're like, listen, it doesn't bounce. We need something different. And we can just say, oh, well, Luke's made his own lightsaber and he's decided to make it green. And of course, that's created any tiny change you make in Star Wars creates tons and tons of lore. Like they explain away everything with mountains of lore, tons of books, all this bullshit. And of course, that was one of the early examples of that. It's like, oh, well, you can have any color lightsaber now. That's essentially allowed, fucking Samuel L. Jackson to have a purple lightsaber in episode 1. But it looks cool, and it does bounce in that sequence in particular. So it was for practical reasons, but it's easy to sell it as a story beat, that's for sure.
In answer to your question from 15 minutes ago, yeah, I didn't mind the badge sequence. I thought it was okay. But again, that seemed to be drawn out. Mm-hmm. Like, how many times does Luke want to turn around and go, all right, last time, do you want to surrender? Like, why? You've already asked him. He's not going to surrender. Just get the perennial little droid who always has a way out of everything to shoot your lightsaber. Like, if there's ever a problem, R2 can do it. Or if there's a problem, R2 can do it. Or, R2. Every fucking thing is...
It was all part of the... It's almost like a very violent mini heist movie, which I love about it. It's like, you're getting all the core characters together and you're just having this cool little moment when they're all like just basically being badasses. And again, there's always the question, I suppose, of how planned everything was. Because was it planned for Leia to end up in that gold bikini? Probably not. I mean, I guess that's another question about that sequence. It's like, and obviously you don't have that attachment to this film, but do you have an attachment to the whole Leia in a gold bikini thing? Because for a generation of people, that was very much a thing. As we found out, there's like Ross in Friends, when obviously Rachel dressed up as Princess Leia and all that jazz. For me, I was just too young. I don't have that.
No, I don't have that.
Let's say, a sexual connection to this film. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, look at Princess Leia in the gold bikini. But that was a massive deal back in the day.
I'm like you, I was too young and I haven't watched this over. And I knew about the gold bikini thing, but it wasn't one of the ones where, for me, that was, that's my sexual awakening. It came far to it. And even now, it's like I look at it and there doesn't seem to be any sexual about it. I just see it as like this story beat because I watched it as a kid. The only way, actually, there's a really famous Rolling Stone shoot they did for this movie. And a lot of it is Carrie Fisher in the gold bikini. And she does actually look fantastic. Like in this, to me, she's just Princess Leia and I can't see beyond that. If you go and see that photo shoot for 1982, 1983 Rolling Stones, it's her at the beach in the bikini, and they are objectively, she just looks fantastic in those bikinis. But like you said, I'm the same as you. I don't have that strange connection to the whole Princess Leia in the bikini thing. But it's one of those things. Yes, that wouldn't happen nowadays, but she gets away with it. One, because she's a badass, and two, she ends up killing Jabba the Hutt. So you're like, oh, it's fine. Thank you. That came on to my next question. How is she able to strangle a slug?
I mean, I guess, you're cutting off its oxygen. It's still, I assume that it still has some form of respiratory system going on there.
Some form of trachea. So, yeah.
Yeah, it must do. I mean, it's kind of, half slug, half kind of human-ish, I suppose. So, if I was going to try and choke out a giant Jabba the Hutt slug, I'd go for the same points. I'm just like, yeah, I think that'd probably do the job. I think you generally squeeze anything hard enough, it probably dies.
But you don't really need to. The dude doesn't move. He can't move unless he's being carried. So all they've got to do is just run around, do what they were doing anyway, get the giant cannon that has another floor, which is it can point to the floor.
Yeah, it's a design fault for sure.
Yeah, and then shoot it, and Jabba sinks and gets swallowed by the sand.
Yeah, but he's got all his buddies kind of doing his bidding.
His buddies were still there shooting at them after she choked him out.
Mm-hmm. So I just don't think it matters the fact that he can't really move. It's it's kind of like,
you don't need to choke him out. You need him to slowly be digested for 1,000 years.
Well, I think you just take your chance. Like she's got a chance to choke him out. Like that'll do the trick.
It would have been, story wise, it would have been better if he's then being slowly digested. What they say for 1,000 years.
You've got to. The thing is, though, you got to remember, and this is something we come across with a lot of these movies going back to like the 80s and stuff, a lot of the narrative choices, and this goes right back to Jaws, back in the 70s, so many choices narratively defined by the technical limitations of the time, which comes with both positives and negatives kind of thing. And I think just one of those, like with Jabba the Hutt, it's like, oh, it's quite easy to choke him. Like they didn't have to move that thing. Like it was so heavy and so many people kind of controlling it that I suspect, and I don't know this for sure, this is just me guessing, that so many of the decisions aren't like, oh, well, what's the best thing to do? In a lot of cases, it'll just be, what can we do? You know, you think, and that's one of the reasons they've gone back and made a lot of these changes, because of course, you know, in his head, George Lucas always wanted that big musical moment in Return of the Jedi, but he couldn't make it work with the puppets. So he's gone back and he's added the CG. Of course, it's ill-advised, despite the fact that I mentioned the song is actually quite catchy. But so many of the decisions that are made in these films are literally just like, well, this is what we can do. And it might not make perfect narrative sense. And of course, sometimes it works out. The perfect example is always Jaws. Like they wanted to show the shark so much more, but they couldn't get the shark to work. So much of it is off screen and limited. But of course, it makes the film subsequently so much more tense. The film wouldn't have been as good if you could have seen the shark loads more. Loads more. God, that was a terrible sentence. You know what I mean? And, you know, in this instance, it's just another one of those films where, like, listen, we can only do so much. I think with the Rancor, for instance, I mentioned the fact that, oh, Luke just throws a rock and it closes the door. I suspect a lot of it is just like, this is all we can get away with. And that is one of the benefits of those special editions. Like, I know the changes are infuriating for a lot of people, but what they also do is tidy those films up. Like, if you go back and watch the original cut of Return of the Jedi, when the Rancor picks up Luke and stuff, you can really see those black lines. Like, it really is visible that that's a puppet or a toy picking up a human being. Whereas, obviously, they've kind of tidied all that up. And, you know, this is true across all the original Star Wars films. But in this film in particular, you've got a film which already looked great, and then the special editions have tidied them up again. And I'd argue, other than a few bits, you know, the Rancor bit included, that this film looks phenomenal. Like, you must admit, like, for a film from 1983, this film looks, like, better than maybe anything else at the time.
And that's what I wanted to say, that it does look great. I mean, the way the speeders go off, the way those really fast, stupid bikes go, the
speeder bikes.
Yeah. You've got the Jabba's palace and the way they're floating across the sand, things like that. I think they look great. I think the space battles and everything, I think are all...
The space battles, I think, look... The attack on the second Death Star in particular, like even when I was younger, that looked a step above everything else in the original trilogy. And I think going back, that has aged unbelievably well.
It's not a second Death Star, is it? It's a new armored space station, even more powerful than the first dreaded Death Star.
I mean, it's a Death Star, isn't it?
Yes,
it's exactly the same.
With the opening scroll, it makes no fucking sense.
But I guess, like, how many times, if you've got the opening scroll, do you want to say Death Star? Oh, there was a Death Star, and now it's another Death Star, so you better watch out for the Death Star. I get why they didn't want to over-encumber us. Yeah, and I guess at some point they wanted to pretend...
Don't use the scroll anymore. The scroll is pointless.
Oh, come on now. You're not going to get... Have you ever met... I mean, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I'm getting slightly miffed with some of the stuff, but you've seen the stuff online. You've seen what these lunatics are like. Imagine if you made a Star Wars film and you're just like, nah, we don't need the scroll anymore. We're going to do away with it. The fucking internet would explode. And in fairness, I would be annoyed. Like, the scroll is, by definition, ridiculous. And a lot of the Rise of Skywalker, a film which I genuinely hate, that starts with the worst scroll ever. You know, what is it? The dead speak with an exclamation mark. It made my toes curl even when I saw it. But I am one for tradition. You know, this is the day after the coronation, and as ridiculous as the king's coronation is, I fundamentally understand why it needs to happen because I believe in tradition and history. And it's the same with movies. You've got to have
but not for things that are pointless. I appreciate it.
The scroll is pointless, though. It's. You've got to remember, this film was made in 1977, A New Hope, and then leading through to 1983. But they were trying to be old-fashioned in the 70s. This is a throwback to 30s,
and I'm not
40s,
arguing
50s serials.
The one in 1977, the first original Star Wars, needed the scroll because you're going straight into a story beat. Yeah. So it needs to explain it. I get the opening scroll for that. Okay, I don't know about the opening scroll for Empire because I really can't remember Empire. Then you've got this one, and it's telling you things that they reiterate in the first 10 to 15 minutes. You don't need this fucking scroll. It's pointless. It's stupid. And I will go on record and say people who are arguing that it needs to be for all Star Wars films are fucking idiots because it doesn't need to happen.
No. So you're getting caught between. It doesn't need to be there. No, like I'm not sure anyone ever reads the scroll and goes, "Oh, thank God, I've just been caught up on Star Wars." It's part of the the majesty of it all, like what makes it unique. Like for me as a Star Wars
But
fan,
it's not unique, is it? If it's the last 9 fucking films.
Yeah, but it's
Scroll
unique
is not unique
no,
then
but
because it's being used all the time.
It's unique to Star Wars. Like if I go to the cinema and I go see a Star Wars film, there is something so special about that uniform introduction. Like regardless of the Star Wars film, especially going to see Star Wars films for the first time again, and it's like a big part of it is like, oh, remember, like it's so much of it is linked to nostalgia and stuff like that now. But even back then, what makes it unique is like it comes up on screen. You get the long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You don't need that anymore. One, it's pointless. Two, we all know the scroll already. Then you get the bang, the Star Wars thing and the scroll. And when I'm seeing the scroll, it's almost like it could be any words. It doesn't matter what's on there. It just needs to be there because it's what fundamentally makes Star Wars unique. So I would say I understand, again, as somebody who isn't a Star Wars fan, and you can fundamentally break it down and say, well, this isn't required. But as a Star Wars fan, it's 100% required, despite the fact that I agree it's also not required. Does that kind of make sense?
And it's not unique anymore, is it? Because it's being used all the time.
Yeah, but it's unique to Star Wars. It's what makes Star Wars Star Wars. It's what makes Star Wars special.
So you're telling me you got rid of that scroll at the beginning. I love the fact we're just stuck on this.
I know.
You get rid of that scroll at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, it's not Star Wars.
100%.
I mean, he pulls out a lightsaber. Oh no, it's not Star Wars because I didn't have the yellow writing at the beginning of my film.
It wouldn't. The point is, you would start the Star Wars film, of course, and I'm not going to be like, I wouldn't walk out the cinema. I'm not one of these militant types, but it wouldn't feel right. No, I sit there, especially for a new Star Wars film, and I will have a big, stupid, shit-eating grin on my face as soon as I see a long time ago Galaxy Far, Far Away, because I know what's coming next, and it's part of it is just the pageantry. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay. The pageantry. And I just think, you absolutely need that, despite the fact that, yes, I understand that it's not really telling you anything that's important. Nobody's like remembers verbatim the opening scroll, or like, oh, well, this is really setting me up for the film. It's setting you up emotionally rather than narratively, if that makes sense. But I can understand, again, if somebody doesn't have that attachment to Star, who doesn't understand, not understand, that's one word, who's not into Star Wars, I get why you might be like, this all feels a bit silly.
I get what you're saying. I 100% disagree, but I get what you're saying.
No, I think and that is the interesting thing about having this conversation, because I never thought about that before, because I just see it as absolutely essential to Star Wars. But as somebody, again, who's not a Star Wars guy, you can say, well, this isn't required. Whereas I'm just like, oh, it's 100% required. And I guess people just don't really think about that, which is, again, part of the point of this conversation.
Not just moving on really quickly. I've just looked at my notes, right?
Well, we have to eventually. Yeah.
I've just been looking at my notes. Was it Order 66? Have I got that right?
Yes, which is somewhat being undermined now.
So ultimately, that was a failure then, because if you look at everything that's happened, the animated series, all the TV shows, the films, everything like that, there's so many Jedis. I believe they missed, they probably killed less Jedis than actually escaped.
Well, that's the thing. It's weird that you come to it from that side, where you're saying, like Order 66 was a failure, which I guess to an extent it was. I always just think of it as a failure of Yoda. Like in this film, his whole big, thing is like, you are the last of the Jedi. There is another Sky War. I'm like, dude, yeah, we know. Just die. Fucking just get on with it. But the big thing with this film is that he is supposedly the last Jedi. That's the whole vibe. But like you said, there's so many. Like they have absolutely undermined everything that Yoda said. And to your point, the potency of Order 66 by just making it clear that there's like 27 Jedi still just knocking around.
Yeah, from Obi-Wan, right? The actual TV show Obi-Wan. They're being hunted by, I want to get this right now because I don't want you yelling at me. Inquisitors?
Yeah, honest to God, for a second there, I was like, if this motherfucker says Darth Vader, I'm just going to jump out the window. I can't get his name right. Is it Darth Vader? Is that how it's pronounced? Inquisitors, yeah.
Yeah. So they're all being, but apparently, because it's happened now with, as you said, I've been playing Fallen Order. It happened in Obi-Wan. And it's probably happened elsewhere. All of these Inquisitors that I've seen so far have gone, yes, but I was a Jedi. And I was one of those kid Jedis, but now they forced me to be. So they didn't get killed. They were actually turned to the dark side. So
yeah, but then I guess you can make the argument that the Jedi are gone because they've been made into Sith.
But Order 66 was to kill all the Jedis, or was it to just, I don't know, maybe pat them on the head and say, right, you're now on the dark side?
Well, I guess, and again, that's the thing. I'm sure some Star Wars fan might be screaming at the podcast because they'll know all the background and all the books, all the animated TV shows. I have to assume that Order 66.
If you think a Star Wars fan is still listening to this,
oh yeah, they'd be furious. Well, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what they think actually. But that's the thing though. So much of the narrative with Star Wars films, and this is a bit of an aside here, is hardcore Star Wars fans arguing with hardcore Star Wars fans. And then, of course, on the other side, you have people who just don't give a fuck. So it's nice almost to have this conversation, I think, in the middle, in so much that I think it's actually quite unique. Because usually it's just like people arguing over like the tiniest little details of a Star Wars film, which I couldn't give a fuck about. Like the only thing I find really bizarre at the moment is the discourse around The Last Jedi, but that's a whole different conversation. But to again, you end up having a completely different conversation if you come to someone who's just like, like I'm aware of Star Wars, I'm not a massive fan. It's like you're bringing up issues with this film I wasn't expecting at all. I thought, you're going to have an issue with the Ewoks, you're going to have an issue with like some of the dialogue is really, as I said, even for me coming back to it, I'm like, man, I can't remember the dialogue being this earnest. Yeah. But I think part of it is just that need to keep the story going. They're like, listen, as soon as we get a bit of, if we add complexity to this narrative, this film's going to end up being 3 hours long. And it's what, 2 hours, 10, 15, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. It's like, considering how much is in it, it's amazing how much they fit into what is ostensibly a 2 hour film.
You've mentioned it, right? So let's go back to the forest moon of Endor.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like the Ewoks.
Well, again, it's a weird one because I grew up obviously with the Ewoks, and it's like the whole Jar Jar conversation. When I watched episode 1 as a grown up, I was 17 at the time, and I didn't like Jar Jar Binks. But the argument was, well, this is for kids, in the same way that when I was a kid, the Ewoks were for me. And when I was a kid, I did like Ewoks. And for this film, and one of the reasons we did this movie is that they've re-released it in cinema for the 40th anniversary. So I went to see it right after last week's recording. We did the podcast. I went straight to the cinema, watched Return of the Jedi. And there were a few kids in there. And I could hear them giggling constantly when the fucking Ewoks were on screen. They love the Ewoks. And I was like, oh yeah, this is for kids. And I will go back to an extent to say that the Ewoks are better than Jar Jar Binks. They're just cuter. Like Wicket is cute. But it does, like that whole sequence on Endor, minus the speed bike chase is great. But as soon as it turns into that three-pronged finale, so as soon as you establish, like Han and the troopers are trying to blow up the deflector shield, you got Luke fighting Vader and the Emperor on the Death Star or whatever it is, and you've got Lando and what's his name, Nieb Noon, what the hell's his name? I forgot his name. His co-pilot.
Oh, I have no idea. The only name that...
Oh, Nien Num.
That's it. That stuck out for me was that lettuce wedge dude. Wedge?
Lettuce, yeah, he's from the first one, but never mind. But
as soon as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in this as well. Yeah, I'm just saying he's a throwback. But
okay,
once you get into that three-pronged finale, I think the stuff with Luke, Vader, and Palpatine is great. I think the stuff with Lando and the attack on the Death Star is amazing. I think the stuff on Endor is a bit of a cartoon. I do agree. And I actually think Han, this is his weakest movie by far. I don't think Han's great in this film.
No, because Harrison Ford didn't want to be in this film. Why don't they just kill him off like he wanted?
I know, they really should have.
Didn't he? Just get rid of him. If he doesn't want to be there, just get rid of him.
Well, it was almost like they didn't quite know what, like, he's just kind of pining over Leia the whole film. He just doesn't feel as cool in this film. It's like he gets jealous of Leia. Yes, he blows up the deflector shield thing. But like, I don't know, it feels like he's almost there for comic relief in this film. And again, I think it lends itself to the idea of like, why did I always prefer Luke to Han? And I think it was because when I was younger, I probably watched this film more than the others. And in this film, Luke's so much better than Han. Like, Han's great in Empire. He's great in the first film. He's not great in this film. And he's in the weakest part of the story for sure, because I get what they were trying to do. It's like they're trying to tell a story about unarmed forces taking on a kind of well-armed invading force, kind of like Afghanistan versus Russia in the 80s. But the reality is you've got bears fighting, fully armored stormtroopers, and they shouldn't stand a chance. And it's a bit pony, but like at least the stuff on Endor looks cool. Like the STSTs look great. It's fine.
I had to question things like these little tiny bears putting massive tree trunks into the canopies of the trees and then cutting it and then taking the head of a walker out and things like that. Like,
yeah, well, there's in their defense, there are little hints. Like, obviously, when they're they play it for laughs. but they were going to cook Luke and Han alive and eat them. Like, that was the plan. And if you look around, there are a lot of skulls. Like, they do, despite the fact that they're so cute, they are constantly telling you this is like a warrior tribe of tiny bears, that they can be vicious little shits, basically. So the problem is they maybe made them too cute, so they're kind of stuck between two places. On the one side, they're trying to make a film for kids and obviously make toys which are going to sell. It's like, well, we've got to make the Ewoks cute. But on the other side, they've got to make it so that they're believable in terms of fighting against stormtroopers. So they have like skulls around and be like, oh no, they're really savage, but they're also really cute. And it doesn't quite work at either end of the scale, sadly. Although one thing I never noticed before, the Ewoks blink now. I never noticed it. It was added for the very latest Blu-ray edition. They added blinking to the Ewoks, and I was like, I'm not sure. Of all the changes they made, I'm like, oh yeah, I can live with them blinking. That's fine. I'm just saying. Well, but like, I do agree though, especially coming into it as a grown-up, as an adult, that whole sequence is rather silly. Like, you got those big, huge ST walkers. They look amazing, but as soon as they fall over, it's like a cartoon. They just blow up. They just blow up. Well, why the fuck does it blow up? It makes no sense. All these, stormtroopers have got armor. They get hit with these tiny little, stones, and they just They die as well. Yeah, it's silly. But at least the other stuff's great.
As Chewbacca, I know Chewbacca's always been tall, but has he always been skinny and scraggly?
Yeah, he's not like, I think some of the toys in particular, like what I remember is like with the re-release, because the last time I'd seen this film in the cinema was 1997 when the special editions were re-released. Okay. They put them all back into cinema, and I went to see them for the first time on the big screen. And as part of that, they basically made a new toy line linked to the original trilogy. And in that, it's like Chewbacca's like hench, Luke is hench, but then you go back and watch the film, it's like, no, he's actually tight, like you say, quite tall and scraggly.
The toy line and a lot of other things I've seen with Chewbacca seem to have just given him a sandwich. Because in this one, the dude was asking for something.
Giving him a sandwich.
Like, he's so.
Someone get that Wookiee a fucking sandwich, dude. Jesus Christ!
Somebody just feed him, for fuck's sake.
No, I see what you mean, but I think he's in more action set pieces in this one. Again, I'm not sure I love the stuff with Chewie. I think basically, as soon as Luke decides to leave Endor, or the Forest Moon of Endor, whatever we want to call it, as soon as he decides to leave, that whole sequence kind of falls to pieces a bit. As soon as it becomes, and it's weird right from the off. As I said, it's like they capture Leia. Do they braid her hair? I think they braid her hair. And then on top of that, do they make her a dress? She didn't come in that dress. She's wearing like a fucking Endor dress. It's like, wait, well, where did that come from? Again, no thought given to what that means narratively, which really is very strange. It's just like, she's on Endor now. Let's just give her an Endor dress, despite the fact that it makes no sense. I think they were so into the visuals of this film above all else. But there's the other side of it, of course, is comparatively, if we're comparing this directly to A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, the writing just isn't as good. The direction is decent, but the writing is
the writing good as well. Right, we're going for the writing. Mm-hmm. So many things could have stopped Han being a little bitch if they would have just turned around and went, "Oh, Luke's just flown off. He just told me he's my brother."
Yeah, it feels like she really could have just told him earlier. Why didn't she? I guess she's dealing with it, and the whole Luke, Leia, brother sister thing. Is it right? Again, I'm going to ask you, because you're coming to this relatively fresh. Is it required in any way? Because I'm like, I don't think it is. Is it just a shock ploy? Because obviously we are coming off the biggest reveal in cinema history. Make no mistake, Empire Strikes Back. Obviously, I wasn't there around at the time.
What, the I'm your daddy thing?
I'm your daddy, yes, exactly. That is verbatim. That's exactly what he said. I am your father thing was one of the biggest reveals in cinema history, and still resonates today.
You were so mad.
Well, I'm your daddy. Come on, dude. Don't make it weird. Not only was it an unbelievable narrative reveal, but the way it was revealed, like, the sequence, the scene, the way it was shot, everything about that is perfect. Whereas in this film, it's almost like they've like, listen, we've got to try and have something to match that. And they kind of throw it in, oh, my sister, of course. And then he tells her, and she's like, oh, I always knew. It's like, did you always knew? Because it looked like you guys were like making out quite a bit, and Luke was always hitting on you.
They tongue each other in the first.
They did. Well, she didn't tongue, but she does kiss him to make Han, jealous, of course. But she kisses him, and he's clearly hitting on her. And it's just one of those weird anachronisms of 80s cinema, the fact that you could get away with this, especially for the biggest movie in history. Imagine Disney doing this today. It just wouldn't fuck. There's no way they'd be like, oh, wait, they could be brother and sister. Like, wait, dude, you know they kissed in the first film. The internet will tear us to shreds. There's no fucking way. But in this, they're just like, we need something. We could go with that. I actually think looking back at it, that feels both lazily written and largely inconsequential.
Yeah. Do you know what, right? You said about the writing and the directing.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought George Lucas directed all of them.
No, a Welshman directed this.
Yeah, round the corner from me as it goes in Lanishan.
Yeah, Lanishan. So I didn't actually know much of his other work. So he directed the critically acclaimed 1981 drama film Eye of the Needle, which I think ostensibly got him the role. The Quiet Parasite Romance Until September, again, don't know that. And the hit 1985 thriller Jagged Eye. Like I said, it was Eye of the Needle, which got him certainly put him on the radar for George Lucas, but I don't know, and I haven't seen his other movies.
The only thing I know him from other now than Return of the Jedi is he wrote the story for the Van Damme film Nowhere to Run.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go. Well, it's weird because he's quoted as saying that he's a sentimental and very emotional Welshman. And it's like, you can actually see that on screen. I think that this film is sentimental. It is overly emotional in a way that, certainly coming off Empire, which is so much darker, so much more grounded, that you get to this and everything's kind of big brushstrokes. And like I said, some of the positives, it allows the movie to move at a real clip, but it means fundamentally, as much as I do enjoy this movie, and I do enjoy this film because, as I said, I think especially the second half of the film is an almost unbelievable, unmatched spectacle. It loses out in terms of narrative nuance. What I think of in terms of a comparison, actually, is I always think of this as very much being the Star Wars' Temple of Doom. Like, Temple of Doom fundamentally isn't as well made, isn't as well written as The Last Crusade or Raiders of the Lost Ark. But if you go back and watch Temple of Doom, it's got unbelievable set pieces. Like, it just does not fucking stop. And I think this has a similar vibe. It's objectively not as good as episodes 4 and 5, but it's got some of the best visuals of the entire series, I think. And that's why I think it still holds a special place in people's hearts, despite the fucking Ewoks. But I have to ask, though, because, again, not having that attachment, you don't really have any issue with the changes, I suppose, then, that they made for the special edition, because you have no real point of reference.
No, I'm assuming everybody kicked off when Hayden Christensen appeared in the thing.
That was an issue.
I'm assuming people, I don't know, it's like all these Snyder people as well kicking off because James Gunn is going to do better than Snyder, and everyone's just not happy with it.
You know what the geeks get like.
Yeah, so I'm assuming everyone just went nuts at it. And I just looked at him and thought, yeah, all right.
Well, it's weird because I feel a little bit for Sebastian Shaw, because obviously he had that final shot at the end of the movie because he was playing, older Darth Vader. If I wanted to speak in defense of that sequence, you could say, well, that was, he's, as a Force ghost, he's basically in the form, the last time he was Anakin. So the last time he was truly Anakin Skywalker was at that age just before he got turned into Darth Vader. So he's kind of reverted to that. But in reality, it was needless. I don't like that. But like you said, I'm not going crazy about that. It is what it is. The musical number, a lot of people despise it. I didn't mind it.
I couldn't have told you if that was added later or not. I honestly couldn't.
Well, the two really egregious ones for me, and one of the worst one is the most recent one, because it wasn't added in 97, it's been added recently, is the no that you get from Darth Vader. So when he picks up, you have that great sequence when the Emperor is now young Skywalker. You will die. And he, starts shocking him and stuff. Yeah. And Vader's got that decision to make. Do I let this guy kill my son? In the original cut, he just picks him up and throws him over the edge. But of course now, he does not only one no, but two no's. No. I'd love to think it's a deep cut reference to James Earl Jones's performance in Best of the Best. Yeah. But in reality, they're trying to make sense of that no, that terrible no at the end of episode 3. I don't like that. But the most upsetting one is the loss of Nyub Nyub, whatever it's called. The song at the end of Return of the Jedi, the original one, is fantastic. The one they've replaced it with is actually okay, but the loss of the original tune at the celebration sequence is really upsetting to me. But I appreciate, as I'm saying this, you're just looking at me like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. I have no idea.
When you said upsetting, what I might say next probably, might upset you a bit more.
More than the loss of Yub Nub?
Maybe.
Okay.
When after that, what you just said, no thing, and then Vader's on the floor and he says to Luke, "Right, take my helmet off. I want to see you with my own eyes," or whatever he says. As soon as he took that helmet off, all I could think was, "Oh, they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again."
He does look a bit like an egg.
He does. Like it's ridiculous how egg shaped that dude is, and that's meant to be Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, it's like they didn't kind of capture the fact that he looks like a badass. Like that is one of the things. Like I have a lot of issues with the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but those sequences when he takes off the helmet and you can actually see Hayden Christensen's face under the mask, he still looks quite scary. Whereas in this, and I know he's just kind of like let go of his hate and he's no longer with the dark side and stuff, but he really does look like an old egg. Like there's no, like, you know, you think it upset me. I totally agree. He always looked like a slightly broken egg, which is a bit of a shame, sadly. But like, did that sequence at least work for you? The whole showdown with the Emperor, because Ian McDiarmid is so fucking great in that scene. He's really swinging for the fences.
Is he the same Emperor from?
Yeah, the same from all of them.
Yeah.
Okay,
so that thing I thought was good. I'm going to push you to the dark side, right? If you're not going to do it, then you have a sister now. So we'll. See
I love that sequence. Sister.
I think all that's good, but then it's just apparently Darth Vader spent so long being evil that it's a quick turn to being good again. I thought
there are little hints, and obviously it's been playing on his mind, the whole idea that, well, Luke is his son. Like it almost feels like a revelation for him, almost kind of thing. And you have those sequences like when Luke first arrives, and his demeanor does soften. It's like, it's too late for me, son, and all that jazz. Like he speaks in a way we're not used to Darth Vader speaking, and there are little, of course, the main hints coming from Luke saying that he can feel the conflict. I think they do just enough, and narratively, this film is all about that, doing just enough. We're going to get there as quickly as possible. You could make an argument if any sequence needed maybe a bit more, it might be that, like you said, his change from the dark side to, the light, whatever you want to call it. But I think in this film, they do just enough. Like, if the finale was just that, if it was just Luke and the Emperor and Darth, I think that'd be fine. But you're cutting constantly between three set pieces going on at once. So again, you're losing some of that nuance. But in terms of spectacle, I think it's fine. And that bit when Luke really does let his rage go for a minute, when he basically threatens his sister, and then he attacks. I think that's all fantastic. And for a second, you're like, shit, is Luke going to turn to the dark side? The only thing which I think is a bit unfair was growing up with the rules of becoming a Jedi, because he's like, oh, I'm a Jedi now. And everyone basically says, no, you have to face Vader. When I was young, I was like, wait, is that like part of the Jedi training? Like the final test for any Jedi is they have to fight Vader? I was like, that's a pretty harsh fucking test. Surely most of them end up dead. But no, I thought Mark Hamill's fantastic in that sequence. I think Ian McDiarmid, especially as the Emperor comes in and he's just absolutely almost steals the film from everyone. And from a purely spectacle point of view, the stuff with Admiral Akbar and Lando attacking, like the most amazing thing that they do, I think, is, as you mentioned, they're doing the same thing. They're attacking the Death Star again. They make it feel completely unique. It feels a million miles away from the trench run. The way that they fly into the Death Star, I mean, again, sometimes I have to remind myself, this film is from 1983. Parts of it look like it was made yesterday. It looks absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and I get that. It all looked good. Like I said, the flying scenes, the space scenes all looked absolutely great. But I will take you back to the construction on a new armored space station, even more powerful than the first. But they're able to take it down easier.
Well, that's the thing, though. They do link to that narratively. Like Luke said, your overconfidence is your weakness, and he's like, what is it? Your faith in your friends is yours, or something like that. Yeah. That is the point they're saying, is like, because he's the Sith and he's so confident in his army and his actions, like, well, they're going to show up because they think, oh, they're attacking the Death Star. As far as the Emperor's concerned, they're just flying into a trap. Like, he set the trap, they're going to fly, and he's going to destroy the entire Rebel Alliance there and then, and that's going to be the end of them. Luke's going to turn to the dark side, and he has this complete confidence that that's all going to happen. But of course, good overcomes evil and all that nonsense. So I get it. Like, if the deflector shield doesn't get taken down, they can't attack the Death Star. But of course, because of what they do on Endor, everything has to matter and all that jazz. So again, I know where you're coming from, but I think narratively they do just enough to suggest that, well, that's the Emperor's weakness. That's the weakness of the Sith, that they have this overconfidence in their own abilities.
Okay.
Okay, dude.
Do you know as the Death Star is getting destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
and Luke takes Darth Vader onto the ship so he could burn him on the forest moon of Endor?
Yes.
He has enough time to grab his helmet and carry that as well.
It's all going to go, mate. It's all going to go visually. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like, especially if the place is just about to blow up, don't have that conversation with. And I appreciate, like, he's dying. Be like, dude, get him on the ship first. Yeah. Like, maybe take off, have the conversation on the. I'm gonna have to keep saying the full thing on the way back to the forest moon of Endor. But yeah, it's a bit odd that they have it there. But
it seems a bit weird.
It's essential that you remember. Imagine if you had that same sequence with the pyre and he's burning his father, and the mask isn't there, and you've just got the egghead. It just wouldn't look right. So, yeah,
but also, it seems a bit weird to drag dead weight so you could burn him on Endor when he's going to burn anyway on the Death Star.
Well, it's weird because they don't show it visually, but the dead weight should only be the suit, because, of course, when they die, they disappear. Like, that's the whole thing. So I guess that fundamentally, after he has that conversation and Darth dies...
Wait. When a Jedi dies, he disappears.
Yeah, you know that. You've seen the same film as me. Like, it happens to Yoda. Yoda disappears when he dies.
Yeah, but I didn't know all Jedis did that.
Yeah, well, you just think... You've seen A New Hope. Remember when... Obi-Wan gets struck down by Darth Vader. He just disappears, and his all that's left is his robe.
I honestly can't remember how Obi-Wan.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they all disappear. You don't see it on the screen here, but I've got to assume that he disappears, and basically he's just dragging the suit in, so it wouldn't be as heavy.
Those little force bugs that are inside people,
midichlorians,
Jedis, yeah, those things. Mm-hmm. They then make you disappear when you die. They give you another magic power of disappearance.
No, it's not magic power. You just become one with the Force. So you
become one with the Force, but the Force is these weird little bug things.
Let's not get caught up in midichlorians. You know, like when he was making these original films, there was no talk of midichlorians or trying to make it make sense from a scientific perspective. It was just a magical force. It's just magic. They just disappear because magic. That's all you should really read into, I suppose. Okay. Well, I'm just thinking, like, dude, of all the things we brought up in this film, we do not want to get into midichlorians, for fuck's sake. We've already dealt with the prequels. So, I mean, by the end, like you said, I mean, while I fundamentally disagree, for the first half of this film, you didn't think much happened. You do appreciate in the second half, everything happens. Like, the second half, it just doesn't stop. It does not stop.
To be fair, it just, I don't know, it seemed to be, like I said, and why I'm pinpointing 52 minutes is I text you going, I've watched 52 minutes of this film, nothing's happened, but I have 4 pages of notes. And then I do understand, like, a lot has happened. They've got to wrap the story up. They didn't know whether they were going to do sequels, prequels, wherever at this point. So they're trying to wrap up this main story. So I get all that, and I get a lot happened. It just all seems like a slightly pointless movie. So it just, I wasn't, I mean, honestly, mate, I'm not trying to be that person, but just, it wasn't for me.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. That's absolutely fair. So, are we gonna close there? Well, I guess if it wasn't for you, when I went back and I rewatched it with a more critical eye, I am able to pick apart huge swathes of this film. Yeah. But I do think, and again, it's because you don't have that connection. Like, so much of what works, especially towards the end of the film, works because you have this attachment to the characters and an attachment to what's happened in the previous 2 films. And as a closing, you think about how many films have shit the bed narratively with the 3rd film. Tons of them. It's really hard to pull off. Yeah. I think this actually ties a pretty, kind of tidy bow on proceedings at the end of this film without you think of even Return of the King. Return of the King is a fantastic film. It spends 40 minutes ending that film on a purely narrative level. Like, once they've had the big battle and stuff, like, oh, well, here's an extra 40 minutes of what everyone does. Here, you finish the last battle, everyone's just on Endor. It looks like they take a picture. That's what it feels like. Yeah. You see the 4 ghosts, credits. That is it. Like, no time, no big explanation, no 17 goodbyes. They're just like, all right, here's you. Good guys have won, the bad guys have lost. Thin. That's it. It's unreal.
How were the Ewoks able to tune the Stormtrooper helmets to make them sound like drums?
They did a good job. I was thinking, like, have they filled them with water, perhaps? I don't know. They've done it, in terms of.
Did they leave the heads in, but just carve out just enough of each head till it makes it
maybe.
sound?
Yeah, like the heads. Well, that is the thing that the evil side of Ewoks. Like, are the heads still in there? Because I do get the impression that secretly they are savage little bastards. So maybe they are. Who knows? And especially, that you could see that they get quite upset when their comrades, their little buddies die. Only a couple of them die, but you do see a couple of Ewoks die in the film. And it's like this is their vengeance.
To be fair, I'd like to see if they are going to be.
Or maybe they ate the heads. They could have ate the heads.
I'd like to see a horror film about what are they called? The Stormtroopers, the Empire. About them setting up their base on the forest moon of Endor. But originally then they're getting taken out one by one by these little...
Yeah, like a horror movie. Like the Predator, but you basically replace the Predator with hundreds of Ewoks.
Yeah.
Just savage little, and they just, like you said, like really, it's kind of like stealth tactics. They're taking them one at a time, and each one is dying in a more horrific way than the last.
Yeah.
Well, that would be better than the Ewok spin-offs that we got, which we'll get to in Legacy. So we will move on. Do you have a favorite scene? You must have a favorite scene. Because mine's going to upset you for sure.
You go.
Well, I mean, I actually think it's one of the tricky ones to pick. I mean, I genuinely believe I could have gone for 3 or 4. There are so many. But I am going to go for Jabba's palace. I mentioned the fact that so much of it doesn't make sense narratively. You get characters who just seem to pop up. But from a visual perspective, it was unbelievable. Like, Jabba's a great creation. The whole Han and Carbonite on the wall. I know it's all a bit silly, but Lando looks cool in it. Leia's cool. Luke rocking up like that and suddenly being a badass. Especially when I was a kid, I loved all that stuff, and I love the fact that it's a cold opening. I almost want to stretch out and tell you that the one scene is Jabba's palace and Jabba's barge, because I love Jabba's barge well. But I'm not going to be greedy. I'm just going to go for Jabba's palace, and I love the opening to this film. Love it.
For me, it's also visual, but it's when all the spaceships and stuff just arrive to the Death Star, and then you get it's a trap from Admiral Akbar.
It's a trap.
Yeah. And all those things. So for me, because that looks fantastic. Even, like I said, 1983, it looks absolutely fantastic. So that's my favorite scene.
I actually think, and I was thinking about this, I was like, if I didn't have that connection to Star Wars, because I was like, well, would it be Jabba's palace or would it be the Luke versus the Emperor and stuff? But so much of that is because of my connection to the characters. I'm like, if I walked into this movie now and I didn't know anything about the other films or the characters, that would 100% be my favorite scene. Because that's the space battle at the Death Star looks amazing. It's super exciting. I love the way when they're flying out at the end and the flames are coming out, and the Millennium Falcon makes that at the last second. All that stuff is great. I don't know how Admiral Akbar in like 30 seconds of screen time is just so fucking awesome. He's just a giant squid thing. I don't know. He's fucking great. So I actually think mine would have been the same scene, but what can I do? I've got this connection to the characters. In terms of loves, number one, I've already mentioned before, Luke. I think this is his best movie by far, and growing up, he was my favorite character. Number two, the economy of storytelling. I mentioned the fact that does lead to some faults and some egregiously earnest storytelling at times, but I think it does allow what is, a film with so much baggage to kind of move at such an amazing clip, I think is almost unheard of. And I just don't think you get that in 2023. And some of the best set pieces this side of Temple of Doom. I mentioned this is the Temple of Doom of Star Wars films. I totally agree with that for all its faults. I think visually it's spectacular. And even the stuff on Endor, when you really think about it, of course you can cut it to pieces, but it's not happening in and of itself. It's like every time you think that's going to get annoying, it then cuts to Luke. And just as you think that's getting a bit dry, it then cuts to Lando. So it's like it never allows anything to become annoying. It's just this kind of relentless spectacle. So I love that as well.
Cool. For me, Luke, number one as well. I think Mark Hamill is doing really good here. But to be fair, I don't have any recollection of him in the other two to differentiate.
He's good, but he's famously whiny in the other ones. Whereas in this one, he is much more of a badass.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The overall look of the film, I think, is great. I think it holds up. Like the I don't know if it's ILM at this point. If it's
it's all Lucasfilm. Yeah. So Industrial Light and Magic.
I think it looks great. The ships, everything like that. I think
Yeah, it still has that kind of aged, lived-in universe look. But I feel like this is the first film where the technology has finally caught up with the imagination. There are still, limitations, but this is the one. As I said, when I think of Star Wars, and certainly the original trilogy, this is how it looks in my head. Basically, Return of the Jedi is how it all looks in my head. Whereas I think if you go back to the 77 one, it's still an amazing achievement, especially for a relatively low-budget film in 77. But, you can see there is certain limitations in terms of the way the ships move, some of the visuals. Whereas in this, it doesn't feel compromised even now. Like it just objectively still looks great.
And my third one is The Emperor, to be fair. I think The Emperor is really good, really menacing.
Maybe I should have had The Emperor. Ian McDiarmid's so fucking good in this film. Like he just cackles his way through this film so brilliant. He's just so fucking evil. He's so evil.
I mean, and then that just needed to be it for The Emperor. Then they brought him back in those.
Dude, don't get me started on. I mean, if you want to like reverse this, because if you watch Rise of Sky, have you seen Rise of Skywalker?
I've seen them all.
Oh, okay, yeah. You might actually not hate it as much as me because maybe you don't have that same connection.
I thought it was shit.
Oh, I hated it. The stuff with the Emperor.
But I still thought it was better than that fucking middle one.
Oh, see, I love The Last Jedi. That was one of the big issues with Rise of Skywalker is because of I liked, despite again, it's God's fault, but I really liked The Last Jedi. But what they did, and I think that film just represents so much wrong with modern movie making, where they just kind of absolutely folded to this vocal minority online, and then you end up with basically an ill-advised fan-made movie. And that's what happens with these films. It's like if you just listen to all the nerds and you put everything they want in a film, you end up with the fucking narrative mess that is Rise of Skywalker. I hate that film. Anyway, it doesn't matter. hate number one, Rise of Skywalker. In terms of hates, I've talked about the pros and cons of it, but make no mistake, some of the dialogue is unbearably earnest and totally lacks that nuance found in Empire. If you go back and watch Empire Strikes Back, it's just so much better written. It's just, it's night and day. But so that would be number one. I should say the Ewoks, but that would be disingenuous because I did enjoy them growing up. But I'm going to go with the no from Darth Vader. That is a very recent addition, but that really, really annoying. It's just it's just not required. But anyway. And I don't know, I'll go with Han in this film. I know it seems a bit harsh because everyone loves Han Solo, but I just don't think Han's great in this film. Han giving up on Nia feels out of character. The whole "you love him, don't you" thing. It's like he's just so ready to step away from Leia. He's like, oh, I think you might have a crush on Luke, so I'll just bounce. I just don't like any of that stuff. Yeah. So that's going to be number three. Oh, and I'm going to throw in the removal of Yubnub at the end of the film, which I know means nothing to you, but the removal of Yubnub really is a heartbreaker for me.
Have I got to stop at three?
Yeah, go for it, man. I mean, what are your biggest hates?
The two robots, C-3PO, R2-D2. I fucking hate them.
The two robots. Like you have to stress the two robots. Yeah, I
absolutely hate them.
You hate R2. I get not liking C-3PO, but you hate R2.
I hate the gold vibrator, Oscar-looking dude, and R2-D2 as a narrative thing. If ever you need something, R2-D2 is there to break you out of it.
He's so great at R2, man.
Oh, mate, I can't stand the little.
You might be the only person, literally on Earth, who hates R2. That might be completely unique to you.
Well, I am a unique person.
You certainly are if you hate R2, no doubt.
Yeah. And I don't know if I hate him because they're a double act, so I've got to put him with C-3PO because
maybe. They do kind of, go hand in hand, I suppose.
Yeah, not a fan. I hated from Han Solo's cum face all the way up to him being a whiny little bitch. It just wasn't for me. No,
I don't think he's great in this film. That was maybe the most surprising thing going back and rewatching this film. It's just like, man, Han's just not great in this film. And like you said, Harrison Ford was right. He should have been killed off in this film. Yeah. It would have been so much more. He has nothing dramatic to do in this film at all. He's just kind of there, and he's just like, oh man. Like, when people think of this film of somebody like narratively, really done dirty, of course it's Boba Fett. It's always Boba Fett. But I also think like Han Solo's kind of hung out to dry in this film a little bit. Kind of like what happens to Finn, not to quite an extent, in the you think of the way he was established in what was the first one, The Force Awakens, and then almost like they didn't know what to do with him. In this film, it feels like nobody knew what after they rescued him. It's like, well, what do we do with Han now? We really don't know. And they should have killed him, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and the pointless rescue scene at the beginning was just stupid because everything about that rescue scene was just like oh my God, everyone knew everything anyway. Like how Billy D. Williams was able to keep, like nobody knew that was Billy D. Williams, but everyone knew that that was Leia. And then, oh, we're all hiding behind this curtain. Nobody can fucking hear us. Hoo-hoo. And then there's 9,000 times that Luke says, oh, by the way, do you want to give up now? And okay, it's all right. So you're not going to give up. So I'll use the perennial plot device of R2-D2 to give me my lightsaber.
See, if ever a moment has summed up this podcast, it's that. About, what was it, like 3 minutes after I told you that was my favorite scene in the film, you just absolutely tore that to shred. And it wasn't just the fact that you tore it to shred, it was the passion that you didn't have for the other two. I was like, oh, I don't like R2-D2, I don't like C-3PO, I don't like this. And then as soon as you went back to Jabba's palace, Jesus Christ, someone put a fucking rocket up your ass. I'm like, God, he's speaking with such passion, such hate for something I love. So yeah, it is what it is. But I thought that perfectly summed up the podcast.
When you said about that being, I was trying to scramble for a third one because I didn't want to cut your legs off from under you, but I thought, no, I got to do it.
Oh, he's done it. I assume there can't be any alternative titles to this film, can there?
No, actually, there's not. I went looking and looking. I couldn't find. There was only one, really. There was a Japanese one, Jedi's Revenge. That was it.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing. I guess the biggest alternative title was the fact that this was originally going to be called Revenge of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Rather than Return of the Jedi, but it was deemed too violent, too aggressive sounding, so they changed it to Return of the Jedi. So that was the closest we ever got to a genuine alternative title, in so much that I think some of the early, again, artwork does have Revenge of the Jedi down as the title, but in terms of alternative titles in other countries, unsurprisingly, it's just called Return of the Jedi everywhere, and nobody's changing fucking Star Wars, are they?
No, and that one was quite interesting because even like just one word films that we've had, they've had different titles elsewhere. And you think, well, Return of the Jedi, but no, I mean, everyone, obviously Star Wars is a massive thing. You're never going to
You're just not going to fuck with this. Same with Indiana Jones, I suppose. Do you have any facts for the film?
Yeah, I got a couple. So Carrie Fisher really cared about Warwick Davis being well during filming, as he had to spend it in a hot Ewok costume. She provided him with cookies and chocolate milk between takes. Davis later commented she was everything an 11-year-old Ewok could possibly wish for.
Oh, how cute.
The Emperor's chair was mechanized so that it could rotate when a scene called for it. However, the mechanism never worked properly, so Ian McDiarmid had to make it move by shuffling his feet. A piece of tape on the floor told him when to stop so it would not be visible to the camera.
Fantastic. The kind of problems you really got in 80s cinema, even on the biggest budget movies in the world.
During the shot in which Delicious Crumb, the small, annoying rat-like thing that sits with Jabba in his palace, that fucking came from Labyrinth, by the way.
Totally. It 100% looks like it came directly from Labyrinth.
So during the shot where it's chewing off C-3PO's eye, Anthony Daniels had a panic attack while in the suit. He didn't actually say his lines. All of his lines were dubbed in post-production, but repeated, get me up, over and over. This is the take used in the final cut.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, because you're getting real emotions there. If someone's having a panic attack, they're not messing around. He's having a fucking panic attack.
Admiral Akbar's famous line, "It's a trap," was originally scripted. "It's a trick." The line was changed in post-production after a negative test screen.
It's a trick.
Right? Coming from me, right? I love the fact people watched this film and went, really? He says it's a trick? I don't like
It doesn't make sense, though. It's a trick. You wouldn't say it's a trick. It is a terrible... Again, George
But
Lucas
you're okay with the opening scroll that means fucking nothing.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
The Jabba the Hutt puppet took Stuart Freeborn's team 3 months to build. It cost $500,000 to make and weighed 2,000 pounds.
And that's why it didn't end up in the Sarlacc pit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that could have slid off, though. They didn't have to move it. They just...
I guess it is a slug, you know.
Originally, Yoda was not in the script. He was added when George Lucas determined him best to properly confirm to Luke as to whether Darth Vader was his father or not.
And plus, it provides a bit of closure to Empire Strikes Back, I suppose.
The second Death Star was approximately 460% larger than the first one.
Is that in terms of movie size or in terms of...
I don't know. That's all it says.
I assume it's probably in terms of the prop, because they would have had more money. But it looked great.
The word Ewok is never spoken in the movie, nor the individuals are referred to by name. It's when because you said about that one dude, you said a name, and
it's Wicket, yeah. Yeah, but it was all
I was trying to
established
figure out
because
where
of
the names came from.
spin-off movies, cartoons, and stuff like that. But it is one of those things. Yeah, none of these are said in the movies. They never referred to as Ewoks. That was all kind of added to canon afterwards.
Why this makes me feel gross, I don't know. The slithery noises made when Jabba the Hutt moves were created by sound designer Ben Burt running his hands through a cheese casserole.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty gross.
Yeah.
There's something about running your hands through food. What's that film? Pineapple Express.
Yeah.
When he walks into the room and just puts his hand, it's like macaroni cheese. It's just like, I don't know why is that so disturbing? It just is. Hand shouldn't be in there.
The speeder bike pass-by sound effects were done by splicing together thunder sounds with those of a P-38 airplane.
See, again, one of those underappreciated things of this film. The Star Wars saga has always been famed for its sound effects. The lightsabers sound amazing. The Millennium Falcon sounds amazing. The speeder bikes sound amazing. And even I can't remember what they're called, like the forest troopers or whatever, like the speeder bike troopers.
Yeah.
People forget they look awesome. Everybody thinks, stormtroopers, this amazing visual design that they've created. And then just casually, you have this offshoot of other troopers for the forest who also look fucking dope. Everything looks amazing in this film.
Do they have to be
and
trained?
Sounds amazing.
Do they have to be trained about the jamming button on that?
100%. That's like day one of speeder bike trooper training. So,
this jams your comms. We don't know why we put it on you, but
but it would also be really easy. If you ever need to jam comms, press the button.
Yeah.
Anything else? No.
Not like the enemy's comms. This jams your comms.
This jams everything. This is the equivalent of like an EMP. It's fucking everything up.
Last one for me. After appearing in this movie, Lettuce Wedge becomes the only X-Wing pilot character who survived all three movies.
Yep. Wedge is the man. In terms of legacy, the big legacy of this film is that it was just always the de facto third best Star Wars film. I'm not sure if that's true anymore. I think most lists would probably have this. I think, you look at the rest of any given Star Wars list, there's a huge amount of discourse about where the other films should place. I think most people at least have it as Empire Strikes Back, A New Hope, and then Return of the Jedi. Historically, that was always the case. I think nowadays you could make an argument for Rogue One to sneak in there. Personally, I'm one of the people who actually thinks The Last Jedi might be a better film. I know you're not a fan, and I know that film's incredibly divisive. I think when that film is great, I think it's as good as Star Wars has ever been when it's at its peak, but that's besides the point. But I think for a lot of people, this would still be the third best Star Wars film. It still has the magic of the original trilogy, but at the same time, it's clearly the weakest of the three. I don't think there's any argument there. It's like when we did the Temple of Doom podcast, I brought it up a few times. I adore that film, but it's all relative. It's still it's definitively the weakest film of the original Indiana Jones trilogy, but it's still an amazing film. And I think that's the same here. I don't actually think this is quite as good a film as Temple of Doom, but it has enough good stuff to kind of keep its spot.
It'll be interesting to see, like, if I believe this is, because I wasn't a fan of this film, but would I like the other two more than this? It'd be interesting.
You'll like Empire more for sure. Like Empire is an because I went to see this with Bethan, and Bethan, she actually said, she's like, she remembered it being better than it was.
Yeah.
And I actually remembered it being better than it was. It definitely has its problems. I watched Empire a few years ago. It's an objectively fantastic film, and one which is undoubtedly quite a bit ahead of this film. But then Star Wars is a really strange saga of films because there are two exceptional films, and then a lot of them, it's like there's nearly always an issue with every film. Like, a lot of the films are just plain bad, even the ones I enjoy. This one kind of like, it's a good film, but it's flawed for sure. So it's all a bit strange once you get past those first two films, but it is what it is. But like, as much as I still enjoy this film, I understand why you're not a fan, especially, if you don't have that attachment, it's easy to pick apart this film, despite a lot of the stuff that works. For all its faults, I mentioned before, it totally established the summer blockbuster template. Like, this feels like a modern film, the way it's structured. It has the coolest look of all the films, for sure. I know we mentioned the fact that it doesn't have the impact on us because we were too young, but the whole Leia in the bikini thing has a massive legacy that lives on to this day. Yeah. I still think it has some of the best visual effects of all time. Like, it's certainly for 80s films. I'm not sure if they're... And this is early 80s as well. Got to remember that. I don't think there was anything close to it in 1983. But in terms of, in the same way that it might not look as amazing now, Avatar was this benchmark movie for like 2011 or when it was released. I think this was another one of those, like, it was a real benchmark movie in 1983 in terms of what could be achieved at the time. And yeah, I mentioned earlier that, there were 2 direct spin-off Ewok movies for this film. That's where the Ewok thing came up. There was Caravan of Courage and The Battle of Endor, both of which, unsurprisingly, are quite bad. However, the whole thing about this being a movie for kids at times, I remember quite liking Caravan of Courage when I saw it when I was a kid. I tried rewatching it like 15 years ago. I made it through 10 minutes. I was like, no, this is bad. I don't need to see it anymore. This is horrible. So there's also that. But
are they on Disney?
Yeah, they're on Disney Plus.
Are they?
Yeah. You do. Honestly, they're one of those films, like, it's worth putting on for 10 minutes just to see what you're dealing with. Like, I would never say you should watch the whole film, but it's worth banging. Like, there are terrible films where you're like, oh, go watch like 15 minutes of it. Go watch the trailer or something just to get a feel for what you're dealing, just how rough this is. They are that rough, sadly. In terms of score and soundtrack, I mean, we won't go too much into details. Everyone knows about John Williams' score, but the removal of Yub Nub was the real travesty, as I mentioned a bunch of times. But yes, John Williams' score, once again, absolutely soars, especially during those climatic battles. It absolutely does a trick. I know you mentioned the scroll. The scroll, in the same way that John Williams score, it all just feels part of Star Wars. You need those. It's like the new Zelda's coming out soon. And it's like, as good as the new score might be, you want those little reminders, those little bits of traditional score, like the equivalent of the scroll in this film, which just ticks that little nostalgia box for you. It's like, oh yeah, this is cool. Like, when you go out into a field in Hyrule, you want that same piece of music that you heard in Ocarina of Time back in the N64. So yeah, a big part of it is nostalgia above kind of common sense, I suppose. But nostalgia, as you mentioned before, is a very powerful trap, tool. I don't know. In terms of a video game, there's a whole bunch of Star Wars video games, and obviously Return of the Jedi. In terms of specifically Return of the Jedi, the one I always remember is Super Return of the Jedi for the Super NES, which I absolutely loved.
Super Return of the Jedi.
Well, there was Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, and Super Return of the Jedi. All came out on the Super NES. Yeah. But you've got to remember, that was the thing in the Super NES days. There was Super in front of everything. There was Super Contra, Dragon, Super Contra, all that jazz. But those games fucking still hold up. They look amazing. That really cool, like 16-bit pixel graphics, but they're nails really fucking hard as well. The one that always used to grab me, and it was only partly Return of the Jedi, was Star Wars Arcade by Sega. You can still find those knocking around to this day, and they're absolutely amazing. It basically takes a kind of core set piece from each film. Rogue Squadron on the GameCube. It was a launch game for the GameCube. Was one of my favorite games of the time. And again, it takes elements of all the original trilogy, but some of the best stuff is from Return of the Jedi. And there's obviously a bunch of Lego Star Wars games. But in terms of if we were going to make a video game now, the one that came to mind, and we mentioned it a few times, is actually Die Hard Trilogy, which came out on the PS1 and Saturn back in the day. And I was like, this film really is at its best when it's just being a big spectacle. And I was just like, forget the narrative. Just have, like you had in Die Hard Arcade was like basically Die Hard 1, 2, 3, and it just took a set piece from each one. Just take 3 set pieces from this film. You could just do the 3 big set pieces at the end. So you have one bit where it's a third-person shooter on Endor. Then you have a lightsaber fighty bit on the Death Star, and then you have a flying round bit in the Death Star, the attack on the Death Star. So I would keep it simple. I would actually maybe even go back to Sega, just do Star Wars Arcade, but just make it Return of the Jedi Arcade. I think that would be more than enough.
I mean, I'll say I'll say one myself, but you win because I would go with that one. But it would just be what they've done with Jedi Fallen Order at the moment, wouldn't it? Like you take that and then you just put like Luke in the ginger guy's place. What was his name? Cal Kestis.
Okay, well, that's the thing though. Those films are quite surprisingly narrative heavy, and I think the storytelling in those films is really good. I'm not sure if I need the story of Return of the Jedi told again, and that's why I thought the emphasis should just be on just make it a spectacle, just make it an arcade game.
You totally win.
Sorry, I wasn't arguing with you. I was just saying.
You win.
Well, I think I'm just used to arguing with you on this podcast because I definitely haven't won the podcast, that's for sure. Which we will find out now when it comes to the recommendations and the scores. So this is an odd one. We obviously know how it's going to go with Rob, but recommendations is a weird one because if at this point you're one of those people who's just like, I don't like Star Wars or I don't have an interest in, I'm not going to try and convince people to watch Star Wars. Like you've had enough hints, you know enough about it through popular culture to know if it's your thing. So if you haven't seen Return of the Jedi, I'm not going to recommend it to you. I'm not going to recommend Star Wars to you. You either kind of like it or you don't. But in terms of a score, for me, it's maybe the most 4-star film of all time. It has tons of faults, but the highs are super high, especially if you have that emotional connection to the characters. So yeah, this was, for me at least, one of the easiest films we've done to score. It was just like, there was never any doubt. It's 4-star as fuck. That should be on the poster. Return of the Jedi, 4 stars as fuck. Unless, of course, it's Rob's review, which is not going to be 4 stars as fuck.
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because usually when we do these, we're only ever one away or half a star. Like if you give it 4, I give it 3.
Even when we argue, sometimes, like usually we kind of end up meeting oddly in the middle, don't we? But I knew that wasn't going to happen this time.
No,
because you're going to give it 2 stars, of course.
Yeah, it's 2, and I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing more I can say. I've said all I can say, all I need to say about the film as we've gone on. I mean, I'm not going to recommend the third one, considering I have no recollection of the others. I mean, the only recollection I have of Empire, as you've already said, and I've upset you with, is the "Who's Your Daddy" part at the end. Like,
oh dear God.
So that's the only recollection I have of Empire.
Yeah, but that might be the most famous line in cinema. It literally might be the most famous line in cinema history, and you've misquoted as "I'm your daddy." Fuck's sake, dude. So yes, you're obviously not recommending it.
No, and it's a 2. It is a 2.
Which is absolutely fine. So what film for next week are you going to choose? Are you going to choose something which you think Liam's going to fucking hate this? But actually, I'm expecting almost retaliation.
No, I wouldn't do that to you. We've never spoken about this film I'm going to do, so I don't know what your thoughts are. I don't even know if you've seen it, to be fair. But I'm sticking with the Empire theme.
Yeah.
And we're going to do Empire Records.
That's the one with Liv Tyler, yeah?
Yeah.
I've seen it once, and I can't remember anything about it other than the fact that I love Liv Tyler. Like, she looks fucking phenomenal in that film. And that's all I remember.
And a young Renee Zellweger as well. So
I totally forgot she was in it.
Yeah.
I can't. Like, that's how much I remember this film. I can't even place her on and the thing is, the main thing I remember is the poster with Liv Tyler at the front, where she's got her hands out like she's holding everyone back.
Yeah.
And I can't remember Renée Zellweger even being on the poster, maybe because I'm always looking at Liv Tyler. That might be it. And I mean, early 90s Liv Tyler, Jesus Christ.
Robin Tunney, who was in the original Craft film as the
Oh, yeah, I remember her. Again, can't remember her being in it at all. I literally remember, but my only memory is the poster and the fact that I've seen it. I've definitely seen it. Can't remember shit.
Well, we were talking to I was talking to one of our listeners. And he mentioned about Empire. And as soon as he mentioned Empire Records, I was like, do you know what? I really want to watch this film again.
I mean, I wouldn't mind rewatching it. It's one of the, again, the personal podcast. I'm not sure if I would have ever gone back and rewatched it. And obviously, it didn't have a huge impact on me because I can't remember shit about it. But maybe I'll feel different about it in 2023. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have to... Jason Chong was the listener I was talking to.
Oh, honestly, I thought you were talking about another person in this film. I was like, dude, at this point, I think you could say anyone. It's like, oh, Robert De Niro was in it, Al Pacino. I was like, were they really? I just can't shit.
Usually we name our listeners, and then I just said, I was talking to one of our listeners, so I couldn't do that to him. So Jason Chong was talking about it. And we'd talk, and I had to move it up the list because I absolutely remember adoring Empire Records.
Jason Chong from Hong Kong, yeah?
He's just one of our listeners. If he's friendly with you, or if you know him, then...
I'm friends. It was weird because I went to a travel agency when I was going over to China in 2006, because 2006 that was the kind of thing you did. And I was staying in Hong Kong for 3 days before I went over to Zhuhai to this whole teaching course and stuff. And he was just like, "Oh, you can just stay with my son and just pay us." Like these things happened back in 2006. I was like, okay. So I went over and met this dude. I didn't know him, never met him before, and he just turned out to just be the coolest fucking guy. So we just hung out in Hong Kong for like 2 or 3 days. I did miss my boat to Zhuhai because he got pissed the night before, son of a bitch. But just like haven't obviously seen him since because he fucking lives in Hong Kong. But he's a cool fucking guy.
It's the same Jason Chong then. I mean,
and if it's not him, I'm really sorry, but.
Not only is he awesome, but he's also got great taste, because as soon as he said Empire Records, I was all in. And I remember it having one of the coolest soundtracks ever. So,
Well, I'm looking forward to it because I can't remember shit about it. But yes, despite despite the title having a dubious link to this film, shifting gears for sure. For Empire, what film? What year was that? Like 93, 92?
I want to say 93 or 94. I'll tell you now.
Okay, I don't know why that really matters.
95.
95. Goddamn. Well, there we go.
Oh,
so yeah,
a blink and you'll miss it. Tobey Maguire.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Well, I'll keep an eye out for that. But yes, thank you for joining us for this very strange look back at Return of the Jedi. Not yet. I can't imagine many other podcasts looking back at Return of the Jedi have gone this way. I assume most people, when they do a podcast about Return of the Jedi, I don't know, fucking like Return of the Jedi. So this has been an interesting one. But I'm sure we're on much more kind of, familiar ground next week for Empire Records. So thanks as always for listening, and join us next week. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. I apologize to anybody I've upset on the recording of this podcast.
What, you mean like me? Son of a bitch.
We will have an episode next week, even though Liam threatened that might not happen. But
well, we'll see. How am I going to feel about this? I don't know. A day or two. I'll just have to settle down. But yes, cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye now.
Bye. Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Darry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.